In the 1960s, Singapore, Malaysia, and Sri Lanka all stood at the same starting line. Former colonies, diverse societies, and agrarian economies. But today, Singapore's GDP per capita is 10 times higher than Sri Lanka's. So, what explains this gap? How did a tiny island with no oil, no farmland, and no water supply become one of the richest nations on earth? Was it luck? Was it leadership? Or one economic turning point that changed everything? All three nations inherited similar colonial legacies, export oriented economies built on tea, rubber, and tin, ethnic diversity that could be a strength or a source of division, and fragile institutions still learning to govern themselves. But here's the paradox: on paper, Singapore had the weakest fundamentals, no natural resources, no hinterland, and no domestic markets. In economics, we'd call this a liability of smallness. Yet Singapore turned that liability into its greatest comparative advantage. In 1965, Singapore was expelled from Malaysia. Unemployment was high, racial tensions simmered, and the nation had no clear growth model. This wasn't just political drama, it was an existential economic crisis.
It is August 9th, 1965. This is Lee Kuan Yew. He has just learned that Singapore, his territory, has been kicked out of Malaysia. National television.
Every time we look back on this moment when we signed this agreement which severed Singapore from Malaysia, it will be a moment of anguish. I mean, for me, it is a moment of anguish because all my life.
But he cannot continue. His voice cracks. He stops. He cries.
Without Malaysia's markets, Singapore had to reinvent its economy from scratch. This crisis forced a choice: despair or discipline. Lee Kuan Yew and his team realized something crucial. Singapore couldn't rely on natural resources. It had to rely on institutions, human capital, and global trade. They set out to make Singapore the Switzerland of Asia, a neutral, trusted hub for finance and commerce. This was a classic case of part dependence, a single turning point that locked Singapore onto a radically different trajectory. So, how did Singapore operationalize this vision? Well, firstly, it was institutions and rule of law. Singapore built a zero tolerance anti corruption system. They built institutions like the Corrupt Practices Investigation Bureau, or the CPIB, which was established in 1952 as part of Singapore's anti corruption agency, responsible for investigating and prosecuting corruption in both public and private sectors. Secondly, human capital. Lee Kuan Yew's education policies were prioritized on human capital development by focusing on science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, or STEM for short. He wanted to produce a skilled workforce. He pushed for universal, high quality education for all, including girls, to maximize the nation's talent pool and economic competitiveness. Thirdly, it was the public goods and housing. The Housing Development Board, or the HDB, built heavily subsidized, high rise public housing flats to resettle Singaporeans from slums, giving them a financial stake in the nation. And lastly, it was multicultural unity. After racial riots, Singapore doubled down on integration. They established English as a common neutral working language to foster integration across all its diverse communities, while also granting official status to Mandarin, Malay, and Tamil to respect and preserve each group's cultural identity. All of this contributed to foreign direct investment in Singapore. While neighbors feared foreign companies, Singapore welcomed them. Multinationals brought capital, technology, and jobs. They couldn't rely on nature, so they relied on discipline. Meanwhile, Malaysia and Sri Lanka had faced different paths. For Malaysia, it was initially stronger, with land and resources. But ethnic based policies like the new economic policy distorted incentives. Instead of maximizing efficiency, the economy tilted towards redistribution. This slowed innovation and created allocative inefficiency. For Sri Lanka, civil war and political instability destroyed investor confidence. In economics, this is the opportunity cost of conflict, leading to decades of lost growth. Weak institutions and delayed reforms meant capital fled elsewhere. Singapore kept compounding on its advantages, while others kept compounding on their mistakes. By the 1980s, Singapore had transitioned from manufacturing to services. Its port became one of the busiest in the entire world. Its banks became some of the most trusted across Asia. This is a structural transformation every developing economy aims for, moving from agriculture to industries to services. And Singapore did it in just 2 decades. To conclude, Singapore's story proves a powerful lesson in economics. History is not destiny. Institutions, incentives, and human capital matter much more than resources. While others looked backward, Singapore looked forward. While others repeated history, Singapore rewrote it. So here's a big question. Can today's struggling nations learn from Singapore's model, or was this a one time miracle? Well, Singapore's rise was not magic, it was mindset. If you found this story inspiring, share it. And if you want more economic deep dives like this, hit subscribe and join the journey. Until then, stay curious and do not miss your eco classes.